Okay, should work. Da, 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 da. Okay, let me make sure my sound is on. It is. All right, I should be live. I hope. I hope you can see me out there. Our normal service is not running, so we're doing it this way. But yes, there I am. Hello, everybody. Hi, welcome. So I don't believe Gareth is going to be on in person, but he can be there in the chat, and and he can comment. This will be kind of fun. I'll have the disembodied body voice, and I'll be on my own here. But we're going to be talking about keeping ourselves motivated. So it's good to have a little bit of an obstacle before you start something like this, because it tells you to keep motivated, right? And we did keep motivated, and we're here. All right, yes, ACK Technology, um, Tennessee, Isle of Wight, Florida. I'm in Florida as well, Wisconsin, all over. I'm excited. So we're in the middle of NaNoWriMo, which, little event you may have heard of. Just in case you aren't aware of it, you don't know how it works. Well, the idea is to get 50,000 words in the month of November. Oh yeah, where is my helmet? I'm sorry. There you go. That's fixed. Thank you. Thank you for that reminder. Yes, so the idea is to get 50,000 words throughout the month of November. Um, and so we're about halfway through. So if you haven't started yet, well, maybe aim for 25,000 words to the end of the month, right? Not bad. But it works out to about 1666 words a day. So that's what you're looking for. All right, now today we're going to talk about, like I said, motivating, keeping yourself motivated as a writer, because we're about halfway through this. Maybe you're finding it a little bit tricky to keep up with. Just not the same without the helmet. That's awesome. Maybe it's hard to keep motivated at this point. You're starting to reach that wall. And so we're going to give you some tips. But yes, somebody said they're almost to 10,000. I would love to hear, while we're talking about this, some of the tips you're using to keep yourself motivated as you go through NaNoWriMo, right? And then also, I'd love to hear your progress so far. So go ahead, put it in the chat. Let me know, how are you doing? Okay, fantastic. 20,923 words so far. Well, that's good, right? Need to double time it today? Yeah, that's very doable, right? Definitely keeping up with that pace. Nice. Sometimes I'd rather clean a dirty oven than face a blank page. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. It's that, it's that, like a dirty oven is almost easier, right? Because it's like, okay, I see what's the problem. It's dirty. Let's clean it, processes. Whereas blank page, it's just endless possibilities, right? So just getting started can be challenging. I understand. But that's also the fun of it too, right? All right, so here are some things that we're going to talk about in terms of tips. So these are just different tips. One of them is create a look board. A look board. Um, I don't know why that's exactly in quotes, but whatever. A look board. I don't know what I was thinking. But a look board would be something where these are motivational images to give you inspiration as you're writing. So let's say you're writing a really cool fantasy world, and your inspiration was kind of like James Cameron. It was bioluminescent animals that live in the deep, and so you want to make a bioluminescent world. Well, what you might have is a bunch of pictures of bioluminescent creatures, and then anytime you start to get a little bit like about what you're writing, well, you can look at that board and you can get that inspiration again. You can go back to that well. You can recapture that first love as to what you were looking at. Another thing too is um, this can make you feel like what you're trying to accomplish, right, in terms of what you're writing. So depending on your skills or your friend's skills, you might be able to create some sort of montage image, like a movie poster or something like that, which is like what the end product is going to look like. and you can have an idea. Maybe work on the cover. I know some people think that, having a cover in mind, even if that's not the finished cover, that's just so motivational, right? Because then it's like there in front of you. And again, every time you kind of get hung up, you can be like, but wait, I'm working towards that. And that can be really helpful. Oh, we got some more numbers. All right. 28,700. Turning off the TV, listening to classical or disco. That's an interesting blend there. Classical or disco. 28,410. I have left the characters drive me, but honestly, the outside deadline nano provide helps. Yes, we're going to talk a little bit about how systems can be helpful in terms of keeping you motivated, because that is something to keep in mind and one reason why Nano is so successful. I find doing a writing sprint is a great way to get started on a scene I'm having problems with. We're going to talk a little bit about that. 36,000, a bit behind, but I don't care. Oh, a personal goal of 80,000. Well, you set a big goal for yourself, but yeah, you're doing great. That's fantastic. Did that for diet and exercise. Didn't work. Grab the chips. Yeah. Well, something like a diet. I know some people, they're like, oh, they put up a model of like this guy with a six pack, right? And it helps. I think sometimes that can almost work negatively. I wouldn't suggest that for a look board. What you're going to do is like, let's say you're writing fantasy and then you put up a picture of like Lord of the Rings, because you might just get almost discouraged by that because you're like, well, I'm never going to be Tolkien, right? So that might work against you. When I'm talking about a look board, I'm talking about something that's a little bit more about your specific project. But that's a good point. But this is where you get to have a picture of success, right? And this is where you want to be careful because, like I said, you don't necessarily want it to be this super lofty goal. It just depends. That can work for some people. For some people, what they like to see is every day they wake up, and they look at a picture of a penthouse apartment or a private island, and it just keeps them moving because it's like maybe someday I'll get to that level. Sure, but for some people, it can actually work the opposite. It can just remind you of where you're at right now. It could be discouraging, so be careful with that. But what I would say is find something that's success in terms of your own personal work, maybe a little bit less lofty of a goal, something a little bit closer to you. So again, the book cover works really well. Um, maybe even just completed books, a picture of that. Things like that could be really helpful. Focus on systems, not results. This is something that I think NaNoWriMo does very well. Even though it's called National Novel Writing Month, ultimately the goal is not to write a novel because you can't really do that in a month. What the goal is to write 50,000 words, right? So this is a system. Within a month, I'm going to write 50,000 words, which breaks down to 1666 words a day. And then we're just going to see what happens, right? This tends to work a lot better than getting too hung up on results. What tends to work better for artists, in my opinion, is to have a constant system of creativity and productivity, and then you just kind of see what happens. So you kind of play around and you do stuff, and then you're like, oh look, it's a book. It works a lot better than to start your year being like, well, I'm going to finish 7 books this year, versus what tends to be better is every day I'm going to make sure I block out this much time to write, or I'm going to do this much words a week, or things like that. When you get a little bit lower level again, it's better. Now, one reason why I think this works well is think of it this way. If you're focused on the result versus the system, it's like you're kind of a failure until you achieve your result. So if you're just focused on the result, it's like I've just got to finish this book, and you're not focused on anything as part of the process, then it's like, well, until you've done the book, you're kind of a failure because you haven't accomplished it, right? And then once you do the book, it's like you don't know what you're doing. Whereas if you're focused on the system, well, as soon as you finish the book, well, you just keep your system up and you just go right to the next thing, right? This is just kind of a mindset thing. So setting small goals, yes. I write better on the weekdays, it seems, than the weekends. This is something to keep in mind, yeah. And this is kind of part of staying in the moment rather than borrowing from the future. Um, and this is where like worry can come in too, right? You can let yourself avalanche instead of being like, oh well, let's say you're going to self-publish on Amazon, and you know that it usually requires quite a lot of churn in order to get noticed. Not always, but often that's the case. And you might be like, okay, well, I'll get this book done, and then in 3 months I'll get another one done, and then 4 months I'll get another one done, and then you just kind of avalanche and you just get so exhausted even thinking about it, right? And that is a terrible place to put yourself. So what you really want to do is think about kind of where you're at right that moment. I would usually save like the career thinking. Try to outsource source it if you can. And I'm not saying most of you are career artists, so you don't have like the resources to make that easy. But you might have friends, family members that can kind of help you with things like that. And then hopefully eventually, maybe you'll get picked up or you'll be noticed enough, and maybe you can even outsource that a little bit more in terms of just somebody to think about that. Think about you as a career versus yourself. Or even if you do spend some time thinking about it, just isolate that time. And then when you're writing, just think about specifically where you're at right now. One book a year is enough for me. Yeah, if that's the pace you write, awesome. Fantastic. You know? Nothing wrong with writing at the level that you're writing. Move a finger. Seems so small, but this is actually a great way to get started. This is the principle that we all know. We're sitting there, we're on a couch, and we just don't even want to move. We're just kind of frozen because nothing's motivating us, right? We're not motivated enough even to get up. It would take us being super hungry or needing to use the restroom. Otherwise, we're just going to be sitting there, right? Well, one way you can get yourself out of that mode, even if you are fighting with yourself and you're like, oh, I really wish I could do something, but I just can't find the motivation, is to literally just move a finger. Just start moving a little bit. Couch lock, yes, people call it that. Yeah, move a finger, move a foot, just start doing something. And that's the same thing with writing. Instead of being like, I just don't know, like writing, is that really what I want to do right now? Just kind of force yourself into a little bit and then see if it doesn't get you started. Now, I'm not saying every time you do that, it's going to result in a brilliant, productive time frame because it's probably not, always going to do that, but there's going to be lots of times that it will, and it'll probably do it more often than you would expect. Um, Humans are just the way our brain works. We tend to be very good at keeping up momentum in comparison to getting that momentum started. Once you get that momentum started, you just start writing. It starts to flow. And literally, I mean, just sit at the keyboard, and if you don't even know what to do, just start writing nonsense. Start writing the lyrics of a song you like. Just all different kinds of things. Hey, Al, how are you? How's your progress going? Any learns of NaNoWriMo so far? Realistic perspective and healthy ambition. Those are great key phrases. I love that. Fantastic. Track small project. Wrote 5 songs just this week. Yeah, Elle is using NaNoWriMo in order to practice her songwriting, which of course it's a type of writing, so we're all about it. Track small progress. These are those little rewards you give yourself. Did you just finish a scene that was really irritating to write? Where are you in your book right now? Sometimes it's very helpful just to calculate it out. Have an Excel spreadsheet, or there's different apps for that. We're going to be incorporating more of that in AutoCrit software with some of our updates, where you'll be able to track your progress, and it's going to be very helpful because whenever you're writing, well, you can see that progress bar. So let's say you're 10% in the book. Well, then you work a little bit, and now you're 11%. And just knowing you're that much further is helpful. It's just a nice little bar. It's one reason why NaNoWriMo works really well. Yay for AutoCrit updates. Yes, super exciting. Normally, I edit and refine as I go. For Nano, I don't. I make a list of changes and type, type, type. Yeah. For we were talking about that when we were specifically talking about speed, but it's not just about speed as well. I think you have a good point. Not only for speed is it helpful not to be too editor focused when you're writing, but it's good for your motivation as well because it's going to slow down your progress. And if you're constantly like nitpicking yourself, I mean, think of it that way, rather than just living, giving yourself that freedom and being like, you know what, I'm going to turn this off. And I don't care how stupid it is because that's art, right? We're just putting ourselves out there. We're going to see what happens. We can fix it. This is a safe environment for myself, and I'm just going to go with it. That can be a much more motivational environment to work, right? Just think of it if you were like a boss, or I mean, if you had to work for a boss like that, you would much prefer to work for a boss that's like, look, we're going to make mistakes in this job, but it's part of the learning experience. We're going to brush them off. We're going to learn together. That's obviously a boss you would like versus the one that's always standing over your shoulder every time you do something and is like, what? No, really? Um, so you do that to yourself. Don't become the micromanaging boss. Put that person in the corner for a little bit. They'll be super helpful later on, but when you're just trying to get something done, when you're just trying to get words to a page, probably best to put them in the closet for a little bit. I have coffee in the morning and I think of the character and scene for the day, run it through my head to get me prepped. Yeah, like sometimes I think people forget that to motivate yourself, a good thing is to simply just kind of let yourself live in the world, right? Just not write it, but just kind of live it for a little bit. Go out for a walk and just kind of let it come over you and different thoughts and if you can imagine the scene like a movie, some people do that or whatever, and then you can just be so much more excited to write about it. So sure. Some writers color code their text during Nano. Green for keep this, orange for review, red I don't like. That's an interesting like quick thing, right? Yeah, that makes sense. When I was sick, a fellow author told me to write 10 words, then go back to resting so I could feel like I did something no matter how small. Yes, this again goes to that small progress, right? Every win, every time you write, you are learning. Every time. Every letter, every punctuation mark, every time, right? Because it's all practice. It's like, an instrument. Every time you try to get a tone out of an instrument, you're practicing that instrument, right? So it's the same thing. So reward yourself. Give yourself a pat on the back every little time. And I'm not trying to sound like participation trophy or like too childish. I'm just saying, realize what you're doing. Have a conscious um, perspective that what you're doing is practice, and it's great, and it's always great. Practice is great. Gareth wants to tie the editor and put them in the basement. Yes, that sounds right, Gareth. Um, break up some patterns. Keeping yourself motivated, especially artists. Uh, we like novelty, right? That's one reason why we write. We like to create. We like to see new things. So don't be afraid to break up some of your patterns in your life to keep yourself motivated with your writing. If you're finding yourself kind of, I don't really want to write today, well, try something different. Write in a different place. Write with right in your pajamas, right while drinking 4 cups of coffee, like do something kind of fun and silly, right, with a funny silly hat, right? Break up your pattern. Just jostle yourself a little bit because it could just be that you're getting a little bit repetitive and factory, and it's that's hard to motivate yourself when you're like that for sure. My number one distraction is suddenly coming up with new projects. That's a distraction from getting stuff done, but it's not bad for motivation, right? Because it can keep you moving towards, because it can either motivate you to finish the project you're working on, or sometimes people juggle multiple projects. Only type in lowercase and change when edit. If I stop for grammar, I end up in the gutter and down the drain. Yeah, we talked about it in our speeding up. Maybe try a different font that's harder to read, because then you won't be tempted to edit it. Not a bad idea. This is funny though. Try multiple projects. This is something that can sometimes help people that are having a motivation problem, and different artists can do this or not. Some people really can't. It just slows them down too much, and it's just not worth it. But for some people, they can have a work they're writing and a work they are editing, and they are not the same. And so that way they get into their writing space and they're creative, and then they get into their editing headspace and they're their micromanager side. And so they do both. Um, if you can't do this, if you need to always just focus on one thing at a time, nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying if you find it difficult to be motivated, you might try switching it up because maybe you need to switch it up every other day. Maybe writing every day, it's very hard to keep yourself motivating, but you can do Monday is a writing day, Tuesday is an editing day, et cetera, et cetera. Indulge in some silly writing. Yeah, I did say break up your rhythm, do something unusual. But one thing you can try is specifically with your writing, like just write something stupid, you know. Um, and you're like, well, how is that motivating? The motivating thing is it can help you um, visit your love for creativity. You might be a little bit down in the doldrums and you might be a little bit bored at what you're doing because you're at the boring part of your book or something like that. And just having some fun will help you recapture your love. The other thing too is that when you're kind of stuck on a work, it can help you to just come up with the silliest, most outlandish thing that you could possibly do. And you're like, what if somebody wrote a fan fiction for this book? Like, what would be the stupidest thing that they could possibly do? And I'm not begrudging fan fiction, by the way. I'm just saying. Uh, but and then you do it, right? And then you wonder, well, then you write your crazy thing, and then, like I said, you can revisit your love for writing, and you can have a lot of fun with that. I lost my slide. A shift in compartmentalizing. Another thing you might try with motivation is try keeping everything secret about what you're doing. And what I mean by that is sometimes when we go out there and we have friends or family and they're like, "What are you working on?" And you're like, "It's a beautiful world and there's this person and they're doing this and then they have this and you tell them the whole story." There's a little piece of you that kind of feels like, oh, that story's been told, right? And not having that story be a secret can sometimes be a killer for a lot of people. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're like, well, I'm a pantser. I could never do that. Well, you could at least tell them where you're at to that point, right? And again, that just could keep you less motivated, and you might have a certain sense of where it's going. But another reason why it might not motivate you very much is you might say, "Oh, I have this really cool story and it's going to be about a world and in this world, there are uplifted cats and they are like people and they wear clothes and they talk." And the person's like, "Well, that's kind of dumb." But the problem is that person's maybe not your audience, or they don't understand that when it's actually on the page, it's not going to come across as stupid as the way you just made it sound in a short synopsis. I mean, you can think of so many concepts like, I don't know, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, right? Just from the get-go, sounds pretty ridiculous, but yet has affinity for a lot of people, even in its silliness, or even other things like that aren't quite as on the nose as that. But if you really think a lot of these concepts through, like Star Wars, mystical force, so people use these laser swords, and there's this cloaked monk sort of guy in the desert, and I mean, it starts. You could propose it in a way that the other person would just be like, what? And then you'll not be very motivated, right? And that other person might very well love it. So a lot of people will actually just not want to tell anybody what's going on, just for the protection that they're not getting that immediate critical feedback, but then also so they don't lose that excitement of, nobody knows this story and I'm going to get it all buttoned up and then I'm going to release it. Now, that doesn't mean that's necessarily the way you work. I like to tell my spouse a lot about what I'm working on, and I actually find that tends to motivate me because sometimes she'll give critical feedback, but then a lot of times uh, she'll um, even if she gives me critical feedback, I can kind of tweak it and then be motivated that I'm on the right track. So it just depends. Um, on the other hand, though, I do recommend announcing projects. And this is either, let's say you've released something and you want your fans to keep you motivated. It's a great way to do it. Or if you're not at any sort of career level, you haven't released anything yet, announce it to other people you know, and you don't have to give a very strict deadline, but you could say, you know what, I'm working on a book right now, because your hope is, well, maybe sometime they'll follow up with you and they'll be like, oh yeah, you mentioned writing a book a while ago. Did you ever finish that? And as soon as you kind of put it out there to the world, it's like, I'm attempting to do this. You've kind of challenged yourself to actually get it done. So, but this is not the same thing as what I was saying. I'm not arguing with myself in terms of, this is not talking about the specifics, right? This is just talking about, this is what I'm doing. I'm writing a book. I'm writing a whatever. I'm writing a short story, things like that. It can be very helpful to keep you motivated that other people. And of course, writing groups. Somebody mentioned accountability. Having an accountability team really helps. Yes, having people that are within your circle and you're like, you know what? I just want to make it work this year. I want to, really dedicate myself to being a better artist this year. And what I need from you is to ever so often just give me a heads up, like, hey, how's it going? Because then you have to tell them, oh, yeah, I didn't really get much done. Or you can say, oh, actually, I'm way ahead of what I wanted to be at, and things like that. So it can be incredibly helpful. My hubby's eyes sometimes start glazing over when I tell him about my fiction, mainly because it's stuff he wouldn't read. Yeah, this is the problem, right? The problem is often the people that are close to us, that are the easy person to talk to, your friends or your family, may have absolutely no interest in the specific work you're on, the genre you're in. And so you're going to get this negative feedback or disinterest that's going to be not very motivating, and it's of no fault of your own. It has nothing to do with how artistically good it is. So yeah, it can be harmful. Stop early. This is something to keep in mind in terms of motivation. Ernest Hemingway, I believe it was, famously would like to stop in the middle of a sentence. He would be like writing, and he would just stop in the middle of a sentence, and then that way the next day he would want to keep writing. Uh, don't be afraid to try things like that. If you find that it's hard to motivate yourself to keep going, maybe stop yourself when you don't think you've reached that wall. Not necessarily, they say for like mind work, or creative work, it takes like what, 15, 20 minutes at least just to get into that headspace, and then you have that productivity time, and then you have to come out of it. So yeah, you don't want to like cut it off too early that you miss that productive time. But what you don't want to do is just drive yourself all the way to the wall to where you're just like, pulling blood to get those last words out. And then, yeah, then you stop. Somebody says, I stop when I start to waffle. Yeah. And then you stop, and maybe even try something like stopping in a mid sentence. If you're starting to waffle, maybe don't finish that sentence. Maybe just start it and then stop it. And that might kind of drive you a little bit crazy, but that might actually be good motivation, right? Because you have that unfinished business to deal with. Another thing too is maybe don't finish a scene. Don't finish a chapter. Don't allow yourself, if you're really super excited about writing something and it's like, well, I could push through and get it done tonight. Maybe don't do that right now. Maybe do it tomorrow, because you might do it that night and then tomorrow find it really difficult to get anything done versus saving it for the next day, right? If I stop, I forget where I was going the next time I write. Interesting. I stop when I find my mind wandering. I would not be able to do that because that's basically all the time. In case you can't notice from the way I talk on these streams. Uh, I find that interesting. All right. Now, when it comes to accountability partners or help like that, or announcing projects, one thing you could possibly do is get one of our author services, like our first chapter critique or our story inspection, or we have the story doctor appointments with me. And when you have pre-booked a first chapter or story inspection, well, you've told yourself, I'm going to have something that I'm going to show to somebody, right? Or booking a story doctor appointment with me, hopefully can get you over maybe something that's a gridlock or something that's keeping you from being as productive. I hope my characters will bug me later. I like that. Characters won't let me rest if I quit early. I just love how when we were talking about our characters, it's always like there's these other people, and you just have to be like, I know, I'm completely sane. It's cool. Bribe yourself, of course. This is like the obvious one, right? Give yourself little rewards as you're going to motivate yourself. This is especially true when you don't have anybody else who cares about your work yet because you haven't shared it to a mass audience. Once you have a lot of people, and I'm not saying that goes away once you have people and you have a mass audience, but obviously a mass audience is very helpful because you know they're anxiously waiting for you to get done. So that's a lot of motivation. When it's just you, yourself, and I, right, essentially, you have to give yourself that little reward. You have to, get that piece of candy or go to that other movie, get the book you wanted, buy the software you wanted, whatever it is, to keep yourself going. And the helpful thing is, if you're specifically using it to motivate yourself for a system reason, let's say you want to do something like a NaNoWriMo system, you say, I want to write 1,600 words a day or something like that, then what can be really helpful is to actually get the thing, that's the reward, and actually put it in your house somewhere where you can literally see it, but you know you're not going to allow yourself to have it until that point. I brought 2 bribes and some Taco Bell. Love it. One thing you might consider doing at some point is writing down why you are a writer. Like, what's in it for you, right? A lot of people, they have different motivations specifically that's personal to them. And I think a lot of it is shared across the board in terms of uh, entertaining others, giving people emotionally enriching experiences, having fun. A lot of that is universal, but there's a lot of things that are personal to yourself. And sometimes I think you have to remember that. So perhaps writing down why you are a writer and just having that in your back pocket is helpful, right? Let's say you're having a really lousy day and you just go back and you read it. Again, this is something where once you have put your work out there, save those good reviews, right? Make a folder or something because ever so often you need to go out and you need to see that person that said, "Wow, that story made me cry," or "I love the characters," or things like that, and it reminds you of why you are a writer. But again, I know a lot of people here haven't had that experience of being able to share it to a wide audience. So what you have to do is really talk about it from yourself at that point. Earplugs don't stop the characters nagging. They enter the dreams and will keep at you. Yes. They to get the stories out of my head so they don't harass me at 2 a.m. It is really funny. Show me the money. I mean, fair enough. If you're in it because you want to make a living at it, that's a tough road, but plenty of people do it, right? And because you want a job that you like versus the job you have, fair enough. But writing that down specifically, your thoughts about it, in visceral terms, means when you're feeling down about it, you're like, no, I'm gonna do this because I have that motivation. Fair enough. Nothing wrong with career aspirations as a motivation. Nothing at all. Um, I'm going to get a little bit more high level psychological, philosophical, or whatever here. Just these are things that are not only helpful for motivating you as a writer, but they just tend to be great things to do to keep yourself motivated as a person. I'm a big fan of things like positive psychology and things like that. Partly because I have a tendency to get a little bit depressed, and I have a tendency to kind of let my emotions avalanche. So some of the things that I've learned over the years. A good thing to do before you go to bed is to write down 3 positive things that happened to you that day. And this could be something that you do just regarding your writing. You just note, 3 positive things that happened to you in your writing journey. But again, like I said, part of being motivated as a writer is just being motivated as a person in general, right? So if you just write down 3 positive things that happened to you in the day and you go right before you go to sleep, it just means your mind is in a good place right before you go to sleep. And you'll notice it does get a little bit um, habitual, almost a little addicting. You start to really like it because it does tend to work really well for you. Just brushing your teeth count. If you want to call that a positive thing that you want to write down, you can do whatever you want. The point of something like this is it's what's positive to you. It could be that you saw a cat meme you really liked and it just made you really laugh or whatever. It doesn't matter. The point is just you're focusing on things that make life worth living to you, that really affected you right before you go to sleep. It's a great mindset to put yourself in. And again, when it comes to writing, that's part of the process. Now, not only am I'm going to talk about motivating yourself, I'm going to talk about motivating others a little bit here. But this is something you can tell somebody to apply to yourself. But constructive compliments are the best way to motivate somebody. Now, what I mean by that is there's multiple ways that you can respond to somebody making an announcement. You can do and it's really an active compliment because you can do an active compliment, a passive compliment, an active deconstructive statement, or a passive deconstructive statement, right? So imagine your spouse comes home and they're like, I just got a promotion. An active, or I'm sorry, a passive response would be, oh, okay, what's for dinner? That's basically deconstructive because you're completely ignoring it. A passive, positive response would be like, well, you deserve it because you're not really going into anything besides just, okay. But what you want to do is an active, constructive, which is you want to get the person to relive the moment that was the great moment for them, and you want them to kind of go through the steps in their mind as to why they think that actually took place. It's like, oh, so that must have been a lot of work. Why do you think you were recognized? Did you do this or that? You get the person, you start asking them questions. Well, it's the same thing when you're talking to writers, right? When you're talking about a book, and let's say you really like it, and this is the context, right? What you want to do is an active construction. You want constructive compliment. You want to say, "Wow, you really spent a lot of time in your prose here. I'm really impressed with your word choice. Um, things like that." What you don't want to do is, "Wow, you're just a really good writer. It's great." And the reason why is because if you make it seem like just this kind of understood thing, good job, Daniel, putting Gareth into a timeout gave you more screen time. Wow, thanks. But ouch, Gareth. I think Gareth's still in the comments. I think he should comment on that. Is that it? That's a deconstructive compliment. Um, no, but what you're saying is if you tell somebody, wow, you're just a good artist, this is what happens. This is the problem, is that eventually they'll do something and it won't go so well. And they're like, well, I don't know. Maybe they weren't right. Maybe I'm not really a good artist. When that's just kind of the understood. It's the same thing with children and stuff. Rather when they come home from school and they do good on their homework, rather than say, "Wow, you're just really smart," it's like, "Wow, you really thought about that. You paid attention. You did work." Because again, if they get to a class and something is difficult, they'll be like, "I don't know. Maybe I'm not really that smart." And those other compliments were not as helpful along the way. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, but it makes sense to me, and it's something that I try to practice. It's something that I try to practice when talking about other people's work, but it's also something if you want to tell people how to talk about your own work, you can kind of steer them in that direction. What you really want is not, hey, is it good or is it not? Or do you think I'm the next Ernest Hemingway or whatever? I would say what you're looking for is more detailed, concrete. This is what actually worked. This is what made me respond. Things like that. Provided they can. They can't always. Give compliments to yourself or others. The answer is always yes, when you can, for sure. It's just a general rule. Human beings are messed up. We pay attention to criticism way more than we pay attention to compliments. That's another reason why a really well phrased compliment can stand out. because often when you think of a verbose response, you think of it being critical. You don't tend to think of somebody praising something and going on and on about it. You tend to be like, wow, that was amazing. Or this is why it's so bad, blah, 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 blah. It's a long thing. It's just the way it is. We want people to invest in our work, start the process by investing in others. That's a very good point, right? That's also another way to keep yourself motivated is with others. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. But first, we're going to say tackle your weakness with your strength. Okay? It's like showing versus telling. Nice. Yeah, tackle your weakness with your strength. This is another psychological trick you can do for anything. So what you do is you figure out what is the least favorite thing that you have to do on a regular basis, whatever it is. And then you think of what you're good at in life, what you enjoy doing. And your goal is to try to figure out how to use that skill or that talent towards that thing you absolutely can't stand. The example I heard a psychologist give was there was this person and he hated his commute to work. It was just the worst thing ever. It just put him in a horrible funk the whole day. It was just bad. But what he was good at was he loved games and he loved being competitive. So what he decided to do was he turned his commute into a game and he would come up with weird challenges to do for himself. Sometimes he would have to, navigate a certain way or he would have to um, do it on roller skates or whatever. Like he came up with all these fun little Olympic type events just to get him to work. And this might sound a little bit silly or self-indulgent or whatever, but it did change what was the least the part of the day that he hated the most into a part of the day that he actually looked forward to. So what does that mean for us writers? Well, there's always going to be things in writing that we're really great at, that we love to do, that really fit in with what we think our talent is. And then there's other things where we're stretching ourselves, right? We're like, okay, well, I got to do this. It's just part of the process. And the goal should be try to do the same thing. Try to figure out how you can use your strengths to deal with that. So let's imagine, for example, you're really good at writing dialogue. And you really love to do it. You just love to have people talk, and it's very easy for you to do that. But you really hate writing fight scenes. Well, maybe you should brainstorm that fight scene and start it out with somebody explaining that fight scene to seeing somebody else in dialogue. That doesn't mean that's how you're going to end up in the book, but perhaps writing it in such a manner will let you kind of spit it out and it'll be a much faster process and then you can go back and you can tweak it and turn it into narrative. Tricks like that, that's what I'm talking about. And you know how your creative process works. This is going to be very independent to different people, but this is something to try, and it can keep you motivated, right? Because you can turn the things that are the things you hate the most about writing into maybe things that you really love about writing, or at least make them less painful to get through. Find other writers you respect if you can. Although it shouldn't be that hard unless you have way too high of standards. But what I mean by this is you can often find other writers because writers are everywhere and all writers want you to see their work and examine their work and you can get in exchanges, and that's all really great. But what's really going to motivate you is going to be finding other writers that you actually really respect. Other writers that you think are good at what they're doing, have really insightful comments, things like that. And I'm not saying that means they have to be somebody that does it for a living. It just has to be somebody that you respect. You read their work and you really think that they know what they're doing. Because, well, when they come back with you with comments saying this is really good because of this and this reason, it carries weight. It's going to keep you motivated, right? Also, just being in their presence, you're going to pick up tips because they're going to do certain things well and things like that. So definitely finding other writers you respect to have a relationship with is incredibly motivating. Processing the story as part of your writing really helps. I've had whole chapters full of my thinking through the material. It's not the actual book. It's all fluff or thought process. Yeah, nothing wrong with stream of consciousness writing in a first draft, second draft, third draft. Just don't send it to publication. Writers we respect versus because we've read something of theirs versus perpetually talking about writing but not following through, that can end up bogging us down. Exactly, right. Okay, I think I'm back. Sorry about that. I know the text strikes again. Bam, bam, bam. Oh no, now I'm gonna get pulled for copyright. The dreaded buffering circle. Is anybody else buffering? Whenever I hear the term buffering, this is a very strange tangent, but whenever I hear the term buffering, I always think of this comedy film called What's Up, Doc? And and it's a long setup. This is like terrible to bring up, but he goes up and he buys some medicine and it's ridiculous price because somebody put in a radio in there. And anyway, and so they ring it up and he's like, "How much is this without buffering?" And so I always think of that whenever I always think of buffering in that context. Anyway, I'm sorry, my mind was completely wandering. Yes, find other people that you respect because if you're constantly if you're constantly reading writing that is just kind of well, that's not going to put you in a great headspace. Nobody really likes to be the party pooper all the time either. It can be really difficult when you're just having to constantly give negative feedback. That could be kind of demotivating to you because it can make you feel kind of bad because you want to motivate the person, then you feel like you're not sure, and that's not a great headspace. So you're generally better if you can, and it's not going to be a universal within a writing group, but try to make sure you're within a writing group where at least everybody is on a level that you respect um, to a certain extent. Another thing you can do is use a writing coach like me or Gareth. But yes, we have writing coach services. This can be helpful because, well, we'll be on here talking much like we are right now, helping people, helping you with your story, with maybe whatever you're getting hung up on, things like that. It's that accountability piece. You want to come and you want to tell us, oh, I've did this, I accomplished this past week, or I did this, et cetera, et cetera. And so knowing that. Uh, Somebody mentioned the economy of that. Yes, not everybody can, in fact, afford a personal writing coach, but that's one reason why we have events like this. We have the community as part of AutoCrit. You can find accountability there as well. One reason why we're doing, it's a great segue. One reason why we're doing the NaNoWriMo pit stops every 5 days within our AutoCrit community because it's a great way for us to do accountability on a larger scale. Because absolutely, we understand there's going to be varying levels of where you're at financially, where you're at in terms of your professional career, all of that. So yeah, so our next session of the writer pit stop, the Ready Set Write pit stop that we call it, because this is a bit of a race doing NaNoWriMo, is going to be on the 20th. Now that's a Saturday, so we're going to be doing it Saturday night, but I do promise that I'm not going to wear platform shoes and a leisure suit, although I totally would if I had it. I just don't own it. So if you own one and you just want to get rid of it, I'll try to fit into it. I can send you my address. Just put it in the chat. But yeah, we're going to be doing it this Saturday night. All right. Well, Gareth had just got to watch me ramble online here for a little while. Hopefully, he enjoyed what I had to say. I certainly appreciate everybody for joining us. We will be back next week, Tuesday, same time, and we'll be doing another live stream. And then we'll be back on the 30th, which is in a couple weeks, and we'll be doing our big wrap up. Oh, yes, yes. Oh, I love this. Yes. Are you sure O'Neill wasn't referring to Bufferin, a painkiller similar to aspirin? Yes, he was. Yes. It's very abstract that I get from bufferin to buffering. But I always want to say the thing about because buffering is so annoying, so I always want to say how much is it without buffering? Which it's really bufferin. But yes, you're correct. And if you've never seen What's Up, Doc, it is a brilliant screwball comedy from the 1970s that's rather underrated. How do you find your past discussions? I missed a couple weeks because these were only solely for Nano. No, these are not solely for Nano. And if you want to know how to find more of these discussions, go ahead and look up on this YouTube channel. You can like and you can subscribe. And we have over a year of different sessions. So yeah, lots of things. Well, I appreciate everybody out there. Thank you to the AutoCrit community. Thank you, Gareth. Thank you, yes, for sticking with us with some of the technical problems we had today. Um, and we will see you around. All right. Well, I don't want to keep too much of your time because hopefully now you're nice and motivated. So I'm going to crack the whip on you and say, yeah, get back to writing. Okay. Get back to that 1666 word count for the day. And I will see you next week. Okay. Bye, everybody.